Good afternoon and welcome. It's really good to see you. My name is Chris Burr and I'm a tutor at St. Padarn's with responsibility for CMD, Continuing Ministerial Development. So this is the third webinar in a series of 8, looking at the challenges and opportunities around digital ministry, which we've seen come to prominence over recent weeks and months. Each of these 8 webinars will look at a different aspect of digital ministry. You can find details of each of them with a link to book yourself in on the St. Padarn's website. You should find a link posted to the chat box as I speak. Today we're going to be looking at the various ways which we are having to be and do church differently at present. To help us to do that, I'm delighted to say that we have 3 contributors who will share their experience with us. Mark Ansell joins us from St. Michael's, Aberystwyth, who've established a vibrant and dynamic online presence in the past few months and who have found in many ways to connect with new people and to remain engaged with the church too. We're also joined today by David Parry. He's the leader of the Bro Cullinan ministry area centred around Conwy in North Wales. Through lockdown, he and his wife Errol have committed to record daily reflections, which I know have been very positively received by existing church members and others as well. And finally, but by no means least, we will hear from Arun and Arora. Arun is the vicar of St. Nick's Church in Durham, and they've seen a rapid growth in people connecting to church through the traditional morning and evening offices. So a great deal to look forward to today. Before we begin, just a little explanation of how the next hour or so will pan out. For the first 45 minutes or so, I'll be inviting Mark, David and Arun to share some of their experiences with us. That will be followed by a time set aside at the end for questions and answers and possibly some further discussion too. Now, the timings may vary slightly and we may not use our full time allocation today, but however it pans out, I promise that our cut-off time will be no later than 3:15. If you'd like to ask a question at any time, you can submit these via the Q&A function, which you see at the bottom of your screen. And my colleagues Veronica, Jen and Suzanne will be working hard in the background today, monitoring these as we go along. We'll use as the basis for our questions at the end of the session. So if you do have a question that comes to mind, as I say, just go on that Q&A, pop your question on there as we go along. We may not have time to ask all of the questions, and if we have broadly similar questions, we may just choose one of them, or we may run out of time to get to all of them, in which case I apologise in advance, but we'll do our best in the time that we have. If you prefer to ask a question anonymously, then you can enable the anonymity feature that you'll see as you pose your question, and then your name won't come up. Finally, don't worry if you miss anything. We're recording the webinar today and that will be uploaded to the St. Padarn's website. This particular webinar will be available to view hopefully from Thursday. The 2 webinars that we held last week with Bob Jackson and with Peter Phillips, they're already there to be viewed. You will get a feedback request within 24 hours for this particular webinar. It would be really good. You can just take a moment or 2 to fill that in. It's very simple, very straightforward, but we're learning with these webinars as we go along. So all of your feedback is really valuable. These are the first webinars that we held at St. Padarn's. So as I say, all of your feedback is worth sending for us. At one point, 1 or 2 practical things people have already fed back. Somebody said it's a shame we can't see us, but as you'll understand, there are over 70 participants today, so it'll be a little bit chaotic if we had everyone on there. The reason it's not more interactive is, again, with 70 or so participants here, it would be quite disruptive and we may not actually get to hear what the speakers have to say. So we think the best format is just to allow the speakers to present what they bring to us and then to ask the questions and answers via that Q&A facility as we go along. So plenty to do, more than enough from me for now. I'll be back a little bit later to introduce David and to introduce Arun when the time comes. But for now, it's my great joy to introduce Mark Ansell. As I said, he's the church leader at St. Mark's Aberystwyth, and he's going to share a little bit about how their particular church have adapted to digital ministry in recent weeks and months. So over to Mark.
Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. My name is Mark, as you've heard, and I'm the Area Dean of Aberystwyth. I've been here in this job for the past year, although I've been worshipping in the town since the 1980s. And I previously worked for St Michael's Church, Aberystwyth, as administrator, so it's a church and an area that I know well. It's a job like probably no other in the church in Wales. It's very hard maybe for you to compare your life in parish with what I'm doing here. Certainly in our diocese, I'm the area dean of both the smallest and largest ministry area. It's the smallest, we have the fewest churches. There are just 5 churches in my ministry area. It has the smallest footprint, just a few square miles. I usually do my Sunday ministry on foot, walking from church to church. It's that small. So it's very small, but it's probably one of the largest in the diocese in terms of congregation sizes. As I said, I've got 5 churches in my ministry area. We have a large staff team. There are 14 members of staff. So again, that might be very different where you are. I'm not an expert on online church. I'm not a theologian and come with a lot of background. You'll have to talk to Bob Jackson or read some work by John Truscott or some of the other people who've done research and work on online church. But I'm just here today really to share our story, what's been happening in Aberystwyth, how we've reacted, in the hope that it provokes discussion, creativity and ideas for you. I'm not here to boast about what we've done, to show off, and to be honest, I do very little of the production. I rely on others to do a lot of the technical stuff and put the online output together. Previously, before I was ordained, I worked as a head teacher, and we'd often go on courses like you are on today. And I would sit there and I'd have thoughts about how to improve my school, what I would do when I went back to my school, which often were nothing to do with what was being discussed. So this afternoon, if your thoughts go off on a tangent, just let them. You can't copy exactly what we're doing here in Aberystwyth. You'll need to apply some of these things to your own situation, but hopefully you'll be able to think and be inspired about some of the things that you can do wherever you are. We've got around 800 people who view our online output each week. That's roughly double the number of people that we would have in our congregations here. We've made some mistakes as we've switched to online material, but we've learned some lessons too. Some of our work in online services was planned very carefully. Others have just fallen into place and maybe worked out better than we thought. So just 4 things to share with you this afternoon from the Aberystwyth story. The why, the who, the how, and the what. So why? First, why did we get into online church? We need to go back to March, a week before lockdown. And it was rather obvious to many of us that things were going to change rapidly with churches and the church situation in Wales. And indeed, for what turned out to be the last service held at St Michael's Church in Aberystwyth, we decided to experiment with a live stream, which we did for part of the service, just to see what was possible, what we could do, and who would be interested. Then we came to lockdown, of course, no more services allowed to be held. And I remember telling staff at our first staff meeting that I thought we'd meet again in church at around harvest time. And at that time, I got incredulous looks from the staff and from people I was telling, thinking, oh no, it'll be just 2 or 3 weeks and then it will be back to normal. But it looks like, as we plan now for reopening at around harvest time, it looked like that has turned out to be right. The first week in lockdown, we experimented with a live stream. A small group of us went to church when we were allowed in and tried to stream a live service, but it wasn't a success. The church internet connection wasn't enough. We lost our congregation several times. Some of the faithful members came back online with us, but we'd lost most of them. And we made a decision then that we were going to pre-record and broadcast our services live on the web from each Sunday in the future. It was a realization that we were in this for the long term, not just for a few days or a few weeks. And we decided that we needed to keep our church community together, to teach, encourage, and inspire them, to enable them somehow in these strange times to worship, but not on their own, to worship together. During this time of national crisis, we believe that it's important that the church is accessible and is proclaiming the gospel message. It's a particularly receptive time, and as churches here, we didn't want to miss out on that. We've had to close our buildings, of course. We have a drop-in centre in town. We've had to lock that, but we were looking for ways to reach out both to our community and further afield. We've done lots of things, such as send out postcards to dozens and dozens of local shops and businesses and community groups, encouraging them, assuring them of our prayers. And online output, we decided, was just another way of connecting with our community. Hence our decision to provide content on the internet and to go ahead and develop our church community online. Nationally, this is a time when, according to surveys, people are more interested in religion. Surveys have proved that people are now praying more. There's an increased interest in Christianity in our land. We've seen evidence of this here. Just in the last few weeks, I've had a phone call from somebody who's come to faith during lockdown and said, I want to be baptized when I can. Last week, I had an email from somebody who said, my faith has grown steadily throughout this lockdown time, and now I'd like to be confirmed and publicly declare my faith. While our doors are shut, God is at work. And we wanted to be there for people. Going online was one way that we could do that. So that's why and how we got into it in the first place. But onto the how. How did we do it? What did we do practically? I think it was important right from the beginning. We decided not to replicate what we do as a church and just do the same online, but to rethink how we do things and what would work and what wouldn't work. So on Sundays at 11 o'clock, we broadcast on the web a united service for the whole ministry area. And it features styles from all of the traditions of our parish. Now, that's something new to us as a parish. It's extremely rare that we hold a united service, bringing together the different traditions and languages of our group here. So that was a different thing. Usually in our parish, we'd have English and Welsh services, but they're held separately. We have modern and traditional services, but again, they're in separate buildings. But we've blended it all together to produce one united service, and that's been very good for parish unity. Right from the beginning, we've aimed at authenticity. We've said this is a church, it's not a TV channel. So when we record sermons, we record them without editing. They're left in all the mistakes that we make, with my dog barking in the background or whatever is going on. It's just us. We use Welsh learners to do some of our readings, while all the time aiming for high standards, aiming to do the best we can, but to be authentic. The service is published live at 11 on Facebook and YouTube. Following the service, some of the congregations have a fellowship time together on Zoom. We have an evening service in Welsh on Zoom, midweek liturgical services, a thought for the day slot on YouTube. We haven't forgotten our children or youth either. We have separate children's outputs, and the youth have got their own dedicated YouTube channel too. We hold daily prayer meetings online, fellowship times, And there's even some musical get-togethers and quizzes online to hold people together. Throughout all of that, we've learned quite a lot about what works and what doesn't. Just bits and pieces we've learned, some lessons. In terms of technology, we found it useful to stream live both on Facebook and YouTube. That has a number of advantages. Firstly, copyright. They deal with any copyright issues and are responsible for the broadcasting of what goes on their websites, rather than if you stream from your church website, you can face a court case later. We stream on Facebook because that's what people use for tablets or phones, and they can chat along in real time as the service is broadcast. So there's usually 100 messages or so as people chatting on Facebook. We broadcast on YouTube because that's what's accessible for people on televisions. If you have a smart TV, you'll be able to watch it in widescreen on your television. So by doing both, we found we're trying to reach everyone. I know that I'm here to talk about online church, and one of the things that people level against online church is, what about those that have no internet? We've got lots of old people, they say, and they've got no internet. We're very rural and there is no broadband. What do you do? Well, we've reacted to that here as well. Our online service is the core thing that we produce. But for those that are not online, we record the service and we post it out on DVD so that people can put it in their DVD players. For people that don't have DVD players, we record it on audio and post out every week CDs to people. And for those that don't have any technology or maybe no electricity at all, we even do a printed service of the word, which is sent out along with a reflection for everybody who wants that as well. So we try and make sure that we are reaching everyone. For our Zoom meetings, for Zoom, you only need a telephone. So we have a number of people, 2 to 3 people every week join us for evening prayer in Welsh, who are not on the internet, but they can use a phone to join for that. We link our online output with social media. So Facebook and Twitter feeds feature links and updates to what's going on. We've invested a little bit in equipment, but not a lot. It's possible to record a lot of output on an ordinary phone or tablet. It's good to invest in a clip-on microphone or another external microphone just to improve the sound quality. We've learned it takes a while to render videos, even with expensive equipment, and we close our service contributions on a Thursday night to enable everything to be edited together, prepared for broadcast. We've discovered that outdoor recordings work best. If you have a preacher sitting in a room like this with a background that's static, it becomes very boring after a while. If they're out standing in a garden and there are flowers and leaves moving in the wind, it provides an element of movement to it that you wouldn't want to get. We have usually 9 or 10 different people who contribute to our services each week. So different people will be doing readings or prayers or taking part in different ways. But we try and make sure that it is a whole unit and each part is linked to the next. Our services are bilingual, and we've discovered that it's very easy to use on-screen translations. If you go to have a section that is in Welsh only, you can put up an English translation on the screen. In terms of formats, an ordinary service, such as we might have in St. Michael's Church, would normally be an hour and a half, with maybe half an hour of sung worship, another half an hour of input from different people, and a half an hour sermon. Our service is about an hour and a quarter long, but it's not in the same format. It's, if you like, TV style. If you watch Songs of Praise or Dechrau Canu, Dechrau Canmol, things are in small, bite-sized chunks, and we found that that works much better. So our sermon is split into 2 or 3 sections, with maybe a song in between the different ones. We use as many people as we can in getting congregation members as part of the service to do as much as possible, to record things on their phones and send it in. We've experimented by using the choir and music groups that we have here, who've collaborated together distantly, and then has been video edited together. We've discovered that it's good not to be too insular. At the beginning, it was tendency to focus on Aberystwyth and our churches. But actually, we found this is a fantastic time to catch up with our missionary partners abroad. And we've asked for people who are now serving across the world, who've gone out from our congregation, to send us their videos and their updates of what's been going on. And they feature every week in our home and away slot that we have. We discovered it's important to have clear print words on the screen for liturgy or for songs so people can join in. According to the surveys we've done, about half of our congregation would normally sing along to a service in their living room, and the other half don't like doing that, but that's just a little bit of interest for you. We've deliberately gone for a series. We were scheduled in St. Michael's Church in Aberystwyth to do a sermon series on 1 Samuel. And when it came to lockdown, we thought, do we go with this or not? Shall we try it? And we've gone with it. And it's been great to have a narrative story that links together all of our online services. So people are tuning in to find out what happens next in the story of 1 Samuel. After the services broadcast, we put different segments of it. They're chopped up and available separately. So people can look at the worship songs, maybe on YouTube. The sermons are available on the podcast app that we would normally make available. So you can hear the individual bits separately. So that's some of the how we've gone to put it together. And I think you've got more teaching of this in this series about some of the practical things. The how, the why, the who is next. And as I've said, it's good not to think too insular. We were amazed at who tunes in for our services here. And you'll be amazed too if you start putting things online, who becomes part of that online community. Yes, we picked up lots of ex-Aberystwyth people who tune in, lots from across Wales, but also across the world. Every Sunday evening, we have Hwyr Weddi and a Gymraeg. And we have regularly attending there a Welsh learner from California. We have a contributor from Inverness in Scotland, and people from all over who've joined in from that. In our webcast service in the morning, we have regular viewers tuning in from Pakistan. What they see in a Welsh Anglican service from Aberystwyth, I'm not sure, but some of them have become regular. We quickly learned that we've actually got a whole online community developing. We set out to bring together the 5 churches here in Aberystwyth as a worshipping whole. But in fact, we've attracted lots more people than that. It's not just our people in Aberystwyth. And some of the comments that we've received from people who've started watching us online and don't live in Aberystwyth at all, live somewhere else, have said, we now think of you as our church. They have joined our online community. Maybe there's nothing happening in their parish at the moment, maybe nothing is going on, but they've joined us here. Again, just from statistics, from analysing what's going on here, and this might be useful for you, those that watch our online services here do so at different times. About a third of the people who watch our services do so live when it's broadcast at 11. They join in on Facebook or watch it on YouTube, and about a third of our views are done immediately on a Sunday morning. Another third watch sometime during the day on Sunday. They're time-shifting church. They may be having the family together in the evening and sit and watch the service there together, maybe on a Sunday afternoon after lunch. That's another third. But the other third watch during the week, which is fascinating. Maybe they've watched another online church of their own on a Sunday, and they're catching up with us. We know of several people who watch more than one service. Maybe they're people just dipping their toe in and looking to see what's happening in churches at the moment. There's probably all sorts of different people out there. Talking to people and doing a few little surveys, we've discovered that quite a few people prefer not to watch it live, so they can skip past the bits that they don't like. If you're watching it live, there's no way of jumping ahead. If you wait till it's all downloaded on YouTube and it comes to a hymn or a song you don't like, or dare I say, one of the sermons, you can skip past that, fast forward past it. And I'm sure when we get back to meeting as church in a physical building, there'll be people who'll miss that fast forward on a remote control to get past the bit that they want to skip. Here in Aberystwyth, we use church management software to keep track of all of our members and to do a lot of other things as well. Churchwith is what we use here. And we've added a new church to that. So we've created a new church in Aberystwyth, online church. It doesn't have a trendy name yet. Hopefully it will do. So that we could accommodate the new members that we've got here. We can then communicate with them regularly. They sign up to say they want to be associated with our online church, and we're able to send them news on weekly emails and keep in touch with them. And they become part of our online community. They feel part of church here. Some of them have come along to prayer meetings, and some have even participated in the service. We interviewed an online newcomer in our service a couple of weeks ago. We've also, and you may be interested in this, we've also made it possible, of course, for people to give online. There's a link always beneath our videos, and we received donations from those who joined us online. A couple of weeks ago, we had a check in the post from a lady in Brittany, in France, who's been watching us regularly there. Like a real church, people can invite their friends, and it's really easy. You just send a link on Facebook, and then you can have more people coming to your church service. So the why, the how, the who. I'll finish with the what. What next? What is the future of online church? Well, there's only one thing that's certain. The future is uncertain. We don't know what the world will look like by Christmas or next year. We're seeking to develop and expand our online community here, even as we begin to return to normal. What we're planning for here is an overlap between the two forms. Maybe recording a sermon in the church building as part of a service and then webcasting it later. Our choir already choosing carols for an online carol service, even though we hope that we'll be able to hold a physical one too. These two will go side by side. The things we've learned from online church, such as video clips from our missionaries abroad, we can incorporate those into our main church. We'll take that with us. As a ministry area here, we've just decided within the past couple of weeks to appoint a part-time online church pastor to oversee and develop our online church community, to grow it, to try and make that self-funded within 3 years. Unless we have to start paying quota payments, we'll have to see how it goes. The tagline behind the project is turning watchers into worshippers. We know we've got people out there who watch. How do we make them into disciples? How do we make them into worshippers? Online alpha, discussion groups, online Bible studies, lots of ideas, but it needs time and effort. So we've decided to appoint someone to take on that role when our staff team go back to doing what they were doing before. So that's Aberystwyth, that's our story, the why, the how, the who, and the what next maybe of what's going on in Aberystwyth. There'll be time for questions later, but for now, thank you very much. Back to our host, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate that, and a really good insight into how you've approached the challenges and the opportunities really afforded by digital ministry through the last few weeks and months. So lots of practical information there, and a good insight into your thought processes as well, and your kind of hopes for the future. as far as that goes as well. Just to say, Sean posted while you were talking there, Mark, about where they could see some of the stuff you're doing. So for everybody else, we've put that in the Q&As and also in the chat box. There's the links to St. Mike's online material there for you. Another question that we had come in there about outside broadcast, we'll keep that until the end, because I don't want to hold up David Parry now, who's joining us from Conway in North Wales. And David and his wife Errol have been doing daily reflections that I know have gone down very well, both with the church and people outside church. So I'll introduce David, and David, if you can share a little bit about that initiative with us, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Fernando, good afternoon, everyone. I want to just say a few things simply about being local, open, called, and connected. Local, we're a ministry area in North Wales, taking Conwy Town and part of the Conwy Valley. I moved here from Liverpool 4 years ago, and that's when the parish was founded in its current form. And we are profoundly local. All our churches are medieval. All but one of them are Grade 1 listed. Outside the town, it's villages. I have one of my local wardens who's in her 90s, and she refuses to call me anything but rector, because the village had a rector up until about 1960. So we're not rock and roll, we're not cutting edge. Many of my folk are happiest with the prayer book. And although we've got Welsh speakers and incoming English people, essentially most folk were not particularly engaged in online things before all the things that have happened to us here. And I suppose what we've done in the 4 years up until the lockdown was pretty traditional parish ministry. We've developed a huge visitor project in St Mary's Conwy, had 21,000 visitors last year, having previously not been open to tourists. We've developed some contemporary services up in the hills, but we've also done all the seasonal things, the civic things. We've got 2 parish schools, all those things that many parishes have done for a long time. And when lockdown came, we very much wanted to enshrine those same principles and values in whatever we did. We wanted to make sure that what we did still reflected who we were as a community. And so many of the things we do have not been hugely professional, hugely kind of impressive, but actually they've given people a sense, if they have connected with us, of our particular context and this beautiful place that we're fortunate enough to be in. We had, when the GDPR data regulations came in, we'd set up something of a mailing list. I recommend this platform to you if you don't use it. It's called MailChimp, and the basic form of it is free, but it actually allows you to mail people with their consent. So we already had a mailing list through MailChimp, and we used that then to start to speak to people every day, sharing a daily reflection. And so ever since the lockdown started, so 4 months, every day at 8 o'clock, it's popped into people's inbox, this daily reflection. And we took the decision early on that it wouldn't just be me as the vicar or myself and my wife as a pioneer minister talking to people, that we would encourage contributions from as many people as possible. So more than 50 different people have contributed daily reflections. And some of them people who in normal church life were the kind of people who sit at the back and don't say very much, suddenly turned out to have this real gift for sharing their faith, sharing insights, people adjusting to shielding and their world becoming no bigger than their back garden, people returning to nursing to volunteer and frightened about that, people connected to us very tangentially, very distantly, grandparents, extended family. As Mark was saying, people all over the world with connections to us. We've had people from Zambia, Australia, America regularly joining in and also sharing their insights. They've had a very different register, some of them quite academic, some of them very devotional, quite simply expressed. Some people talking about quite personal things. And of course, they've connected with lots of different people. So we've had this wonderful sense of personal resonance. And then people then have talked about the stories that moved them or the insights that have moved them. Basic format's very simple. There's always an image, a photograph, an icon, any kind of image. And then the text is very short, maybe 300, 350 words, something like that. And as I say, it arrives each day. fairly soon then we started sharing worship, and we do that in the same format. So on a Sunday, the daily reflection has a YouTube video. Ours are very short, they're only 15 to 20 minutes. And again, the contributors have been a huge range of people. So people that wouldn't normally be on the rotas to read or share prayers have actually recorded themselves doing readings, prayers. We've preached, shared different talks. Now, you may say, well, what about all the people who can't go online? And Mark made the same point. We've worked really hard to share skills. So, I mean, my wife was absolutely killing herself laughing at me, you know, endlessly saying to elderly people, no, I can see your head. No, you need to tilt the screen. No, try unmute. And actually with that patience, because all of us have been on the edge of what we know. I'd never filmed anything before. We've got a lot of people to participate that wouldn't previously have known they could. And there's something very moving about seeing a retired couple in their conservatory leading the prayers, and you get a sense of their prayer life at home. And many Christians have commented on the fact that we are rediscovering or perhaps elevating something we've overlooked, the sacredness of the domestic, the sacredness of people's own home context. So our daily reflections and our services have very much felt like they're from people's own lives, and that's advocated the idea that discipleship is not some strange elitist thing, but actually all of us can read our Bibles, can pray, can have a relationship with God. The other thing that struck me quite early on is that online is anonymous. So back in the day when many churches had very large congregations, you could sidle in at the back and sit behind a pillar, and you weren't making any big commitment. Whereas in a small congregation, you know, as soon as you come, people are, oh, are you here now? And will you join this? And so we found a lot of people who weren't previously engaged with us are really connected. So a few times I've met out walking, I've met spouses of church members who say, oh, well, you know, we were talking about the daily reflection. So that connectedness has been far more than we would have expected. And I think, thirdly, there's an openness that actually what I've discovered is that many of our folk are natural advocates for Jesus in a way I hadn't previously realised. So one woman has got everyone in her village having the daily reflections. You know, she either prints them off for them, or she says to them, well, you could access the computer, you could read these, they're really good. You know, and so actually on a local level, she's advocated this as a way of connecting and had a huge penetration in that community. Whereas the actual village church normally gets a congregation which has grown in our time from 6 people to 13 or 20, but still very small. So totally, you know, penetration I wouldn't have expected, a connection I wouldn't have expected in that community. The other thing is it's easy for people then to forward. So we've discovered that they're being shared on people's WhatsApp groups or on Facebook. They're shared in various residence groups. Quite a few people then will send them to their parents or their friends. And so they talk about the message or they talk about the film, which adds a value and a connection to it that I obviously wouldn't get in a Sunday just preaching a sermon. So it's almost encouraging them that they are evangelists, they are pastors, and they can actually, you know, be part of the ministry of the church in a new way. Which does bring me to my final point, which is about being called. I think this has been a real time, hasn't it, of a narrowed gaze, of us seeing things more clearly. And many people are questioning what's next. I mean, I know colleagues who, clergy colleagues who are quite reluctant to return to their buildings because it's really shown into sharp relief some of the feelings they have about their congregations or about their ministry. I mean, I don't personally feel like that, but I can recognise that. Some of my retired colleagues have actually been able to rest. And the people who are most busy normally on a Sunday, our wardens, our leaders, I mean, they never normally get much time to worship or to feed their spiritual life. And they're loving, as Mark was saying, you know, connecting with other churches. I'm sure some of them connecting with St. Mike's and other places, being able to choose where they're fed as Christians, and then also reflecting a bit more on what their faith's about. So we have a Zoom coffee on a Sunday. Regularly, sort of 25 people or so join that. We break into groups as well. There's no conversation about money or buildings or you know, the kind of churchy stuff we sometimes get consumed with, people are talking about faith, and they're talking about prayer, and they're talking about fear and bereavement, and they're talking about hopes for the future. And in quite a natural way, an unforced way, they're sharing the riches of their own particular tradition. We've attracted a big range of Christians over the last few years. So we've got very committed conservative Catholics, we've got conservative evangelicals, we've got people with a very liberal approach to Christianity, we've got Pentecostal Christians, we've got many people who aren't Anglicans by background, and all of those labels really don't seem very relevant, even though I've just used them, sorry, but they actually have fallen away as we've become friends in a new way. And I should say, just to finish, that alongside what I've described, we've been phoning people regularly, especially those who can't get online. Now that the restrictions are less, we're starting to do things like deliver cards and to do some distance visiting. We're trying to be as connected as possible. But there is something distinctive, it seems to me, about these online things, which I hadn't previously appreciated. They weren't part of my ministry before, that just has that capacity to promote a conversation. You know, just as when I'm talking to you, sadly, unfortunately, you're seeing me very closely, very intimately, in a way you wouldn't in a big building. So in the same way, the online seems to bring a proximity, a conversation that reminds me of the way Jesus spoke to people, that he seemed to just have that ability to look into their situation and to ask the right question or to listen in the right way. And many of our people have had profound spiritual experiences because of that, if you like, that proximity. And I'm amazed by the new vocations which are emerging and the new opportunities. So that's the news from Brocolum in North Wales.
Great, David. Thank you so much for sharing that. Again, a real insight into how you've approached lockdown and how you've approached online ministry. Lots of very practical things there. So there's a few questions I know that have come through, a few questions I'd like to put based on what you said, but we'll come back to that in the Q&As because it's time to welcome. It's my great joy to welcome Arun Arora. Arun is the vicar of St. Nick's Church in Durham. And they've established a really great ministry around what people often think of as very traditional office services. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Arun and hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Just goes to show, struggling with my mute button, all the general repetitive issues around Zoom. It's good to be able to share with you this morning. I wanted to reflect on the journey that we've been on over the past 3 or 4 months, and I think some of what I'm going to say is going to reflect some of the points made so well by David. Geographically, St. Nick's is a very small church. We are at the heart of the city of Durham, which isn't a very big city. There are about 1,800 people who live in the parish, which geographically covers less than 2 square miles. Very few of those who worship with us live in the parish. We're an open evangelical church, and to that extent, one of the few Anglican evangelical churches within the diocese. And with the lockdown came the realization that in our life together as a worshipping community, a gathered church of about 300 or so people on a Sunday, not being able to meet together in our homes or in church presented for us a real risk of community failing to function in any real and meaningful way. So the past months have been an exploration and journey of unity, actually, for us. And I know not just for us, but for many, but how do we maintain a sense of unity as a gathered church, as one that's scattered across the city? How do we manage to maintain that at a time when we can't physically gather or meet? And for us, intentionally, we try to find 3 particular areas around which to maintain unity, to maintain community during the lockdown. And those 3 areas were that of worship, pastoral and fellowship. None of this is rocket science. You would have heard all of this before. But for us, it was trying to maintain unity through a community that prayed together, that cared for one another, and also a community that still had fun, that shared life. So I just want to, if I can, just go briefly through each of those and our experience of doing that. Chris mentioned our experience with the daily office. Prior to lockdown, our normal pattern would be to gather at 8 a.m. on weekdays for morning prayer. And perhaps up to a dozen of us would do that each morning at 8 a.m. And it's one that we've maintained during lockdown through using Facebook Live. We use the daily prayer app that the Church of England produces, which is free to download. So we tell people to download that or direct them to the Church of England website so that the liturgy is common and it's there for everyone to access. And because we're using Facebook Live, the technical barrier is low. It's just taking your mobile, taking your tablet or your laptop and literally logging into the Facebook page and pressing publish or pressing go live and beginning. And just like before, a range of different people would lead morning prayer. But 2 of the different things that have happened under lockdown. One, and as I think David has just mentioned, because of the ease of being able to do this, literally a phone or a tablet, logging in and pushing the button, we've been able to broaden the range of people who now lead us in prayer, and in that way to enable gifting in a way that perhaps would have been harder to do before, just in terms of opportunity. And the reason for that is that in addition to morning prayer, we have also introduced midday prayer and compline. So during the week, Monday through to Friday, we will have morning prayer at 8, midday prayer at midday, and compline at 9 p.m. And what that has done, particularly during the start of lockdown, when people were dislocated from their natural rhythms of being, was to help introduce a rhythm. The daily offices, and this is ancient wisdom, we can claim no originality on this. This is simply trying to learn and recover ancient practices in a modern, in this case, digital setting. So what that has enabled us to do, I'm sorry, technical hitch, sorry. What that enabled us to do was to start those rhythms. So over those weeks, we went from a dozen people meeting each weekday morning, which in the month of May led to an attendance of 240 people, or 240 attendance over the month, not 240 different people, it has to be said. So during the month of May, it would have been 240 to 300, and in May during lockdown, that became 240 just for morning prayer alone, further 210 for midday prayer, and 161 for night prayer. So we've gone from 240 on a normal month, pre-lockdown, coming to daily offices, just to morning prayer, to 364 for morning prayer, just in lockdown, 210 for midday prayer, and 161 for night prayer. So from 240 pre-lockdown to 735 during lockdown. in terms of attendance at daily offices. And I must say, daily offices is not really part of our usual rhythm as a church in terms of churchmanship. As an open evangelical church, probably the daily office is the nearest we get to being liturgically correct. But opening that and having that as an extra opportunity, I think has been reflected in some of Bob Jackson and George Fisher's research about people yearning perhaps for old uncertainties during this time. There's been a similar situation with our 2 Sunday services, which we do slightly differently, pre-recording during the week and then broadcasting on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and our website. Again, picking up from Bob Fisher and Bob Jackson and George Fisher's research, multiple platforms lead to greater entry. We have thought about going with Zoom and doing our services on Zoom. There are benefits to that in terms of interaction, and clearly ours as broadcast services only work in a broadcast model of communication. But within that, we felt that we were able to work so that we would broadcast our services, but then invite people to Zoom meetings afterwards. The other thing we have sought to do during this time, part of those services, again around that issue of community, is to try and produce short films using the Lord's Prayer and the Apostles' Creed, where as many people as possible contribute to that prayer. So we take a line or a couple of words from each. We asked everyone in the congregation if they could to record the Lord's Prayer and to send it to us, or record the Apostles' Creed and send it to us. The first time we did this was on Easter Day with the Easter greeting, He is risen. He is risen indeed, alleluia. And what was beautiful on that Easter Day morning when we couldn't gather together is that on screen we could see those that family, that spiritual family of which we're part, different faces, all with that Easter greeting. So we try and replicate that now, week in, week out, by using either the Apostles' Creed or the Lord's Prayer as said by members of the family. When it will be during times where we usually have an all-age service, it's our children who lead us in the Lord's Prayer. And so these are edited together, 1-2 lines per person, so that we all say it together, but led by familiar faces. So that's community trying to gather around prayer. Our second way to do this was to try and to gather community and develop unity through pastoral care. And an unexpected benefit of lockdown has been the emphasis for us on intentional pastoral care. So to begin with, this was practical, picking up prescriptions, doing grocery shopping, providing for one another in practical ways. But then this became extended for us through the development of a buddy system, particularly when certain people were self-isolating, and then later in lockdown for a wider group. But the revelation here for us hasn't so much been digital, but the telephone. Whereas before, pastoral care for us as a church was delivered mainly through small groups who met in houses. Under lockdown, of course, this was no longer possible. So we developed a call list so that from the pastoral team that we gathered together, every member of the church was receiving a phone call at least once a week where they'd be asked 3 questions. How are you? Is there anything practical we can do to help? And how can we pray with you? And it's that last, how can we pray with you? How can I pray for you now over the phone? It's that has been the revelation. People have not only been glad to receive the call in terms of pastoral care and welcome that community of ringing each other up, not necessarily because they've got news, but just intentionally to check on how one another are. But actually, it's the offer to pray down the phone and pray over the phone that's both been received and from well received, but for those who are making it, an extension for them of how to pray for someone else in a deeply unfamiliar circumstance. So unity through prayer, unity through pastoral care, and finally, unity through sharing life together, through trying to have fun. One of the first committees alongside the pastoral committee or pastoral team we created was what we called the Fun Committee. And it was their job to devise a programme of social events online that would bring us together. And those have been many and varied. They've involved a weekly quiz, coffee mornings, after services and midweek, scavenger hunts with families, a beetle drive, which I must admit before this time I didn't know what one of those was, wine tastings, gin tastings, fundraisers in Christian Aid Week, an internet radio station, which is surprisingly cheap to run. All of those seeking to bring together our common life in a way where shared interests or diverse ones have been offered for people to join together to share life. Each of these done on Zoom and with an opportunity to welcome new people using that old advice of creating a space of belonging before believing. So people coming to the quiz, we have seen people come to the quiz who perhaps wouldn't have come to church, but through the quiz and through meeting people, we've then been able to say, well, why not try our Sunday service, a community of welcoming everyone online. So that's really the end of my reflection. And I suppose as we begin this hybrid place out of lockdown, trying to physically reopen church, but also maintain online, one of the key questions for us has become, how will we maintain those things which the Holy Spirit has grown in us during this time as a community? How will we be able to identify and live those out in our physical life together, as well as being enriched by these new ways of praying, of caring, and of having fun? Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you, Arun. Again, some really good insights there, some very practical information as well as to how St. Nick's have approached this particular time and kind of looked for the opportunities there of extending ministry. So going to have a short time of Q&As. Thank you for those who posted. If you've got a question to put, send that through and we put that. Now, Annabelle's got a question for Mark, which is a very practical one that she flagged up not far off the beginning of the webinar, Mark. So she's been waiting. Thank you, Annabelle. Very practical one. If you're recording outside, I can remember you saying that it's great to record outside if you can, so you don't have too static a background. How do you combat the wind, the noise, and the bird song?
Yeah, good question. Firstly, recording outside, when I've got a sermon to record, I will record just a minute of test video and audio to make sure what is appearing in the background and what isn't, and is it clear. In order to, I don't mind bird song in the background, it's great. If you listen to our services, you'll often hear bird song in the background, but wind can be a problem. Obviously choose a day that's not too windy and choose a sheltered space. A good tip here is an external microphone. So I'm using one here today, but this one, when I'm recording my sermon, I'll put it in my pocket and it will be shielded by me. You can buy on Amazon for less than £20, little clip-on microphones that will connect to a phone. And you can wear them and they're shielded by you. So you're much less likely to pick up wind noise then, unless you're facing directly into the wind, you'll be fine.
Chris, could I just add something as well? It's really hard, isn't it? When I moved to the countryside, I thought it was going to be quiet, and it's amazing. As soon as you film, suddenly people are with chainsaws, tracks, or whatever. But a friend of mine who is a filmmaker said, noise is okay if you can see it. So if people tune in and they can understand that you're in a windy place or whatever, they'll accept that. if they can just not really see what's going on and they hear a noise in the background, that they won't participate. So I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much, as long as we do our best for noise, really.
Great, thank you for that. A question from Mark, which really maybe all three of you could answer this. And what Mark says is, would you advise a united Sunday service organised by a ministry area rather than each parish or church trying to produce their own? So that's an interesting question, because it talks a bit about collaborative ministry. I know there are churches within Wales and ministry areas within Wales that are doing that. But more often than not, it seems to be that individual churches are looking to do their own thing. So any of you got any sort of strong feelings about that either way?
I would say we got into that by accident. We've got 5 churches and we couldn't produce 5 different online services. So we decided we would do one united service, which initially we thought might not go down too well. We're quite in little cliques in our ministry area, like many other parishes, I guess, where, for instance, we have one church where everything is in Welsh and not a word of English is spoken. Other churches where everything is English, not a word of Welsh is spoken. How do you put that together? Will that be popular? The different styles of worship, liturgical, non-liturgical. But that has been one of the surprises when talking to people that's come out, that they've appreciated the diversity. And now when we come back together to worship, it wouldn't be unthought of that we could actually have a physical united service, which maybe wouldn't have been so popular going back a year. So it's been one of the blessings that I found, although I have to say it wasn't planned like that. It was just out of necessity. Okay.
Arun, just thinking of Durham and thinking of that particular context, you've got quite a compact city centre there with quite a few churches around. So how that played out in your context there?
One of the things that we've tried to do has been we've been blessed with a number of musicians and those who are much more technically gifted than I am. And to that extent, they've been able to produce quite high quality recordings, which we then use in the service and then have built up over time. So we run 2 Sunday services. And so we have about 50 or 60 songs now recorded. And part of that is offering that out to other churches who don't have those resources. So it's trying to get that bit, because the way we do it in terms of pre-records, to take those things, to load them up centrally, to explain that people need licenses, but beyond that then to put that offering out and to try within that to record as broad a range of music as possible, from traditional hymns through to Hillsong and everything in between.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. David, just picking up on something that you shared when you were talking about your experience in Conway there. You talked a lot about lay participation and about this being a great way for people to be able to contribute to the life and ministry of the church that perhaps haven't done so as a church. So how do you, with churches looking to reopen, how do you maintain that engagement, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, certainly I think it's more than just a practical thing. I think what we've really modelled and discovered more deeply is that the whole body of Christ needs to be ministering and sharing the gospel and pastoring. And actually, if we're only hearing some of the voices, if people endlessly just hear my voice, we're actually missing an awful lot of what God is saying to his church and what's going on. I hope that it's broken some of that shyness and some of that sense of only certain people are qualified to do that. And I think for us, there is more of a corporate sense of being Broad Cullen. Broad Cullen is a bit of a mouthful as a name for English people and so on. And as I say, we were a bit of a shotgun marriage only 4 years ago. So, and although we're not the biggest ministry area, our contexts are quite different. The town is quite different from the valley. But I think this has created a corporate sense of being people who trust each other. And I think that will affect our worship as we go forward, still doing online things, but also back in the buildings. You know, it's so hard sometimes, isn't it, in congregations to get people to have the courage to lead intercessions. I mean, someone said to me this week, well, I was thinking of giving it up because mine are never good enough. And I said, well, my sermons are never good enough. Nobody's contribution is ever good enough. That's not the point, is it? We offer something to God, like the loaves and the fishes, and he does something with them. So I think people have got that message, and it's also legitimised the fact that we can express ourselves in very different language. I mean, I'm a Welsh learner, and many people, I wouldn't presume to speak about the Welsh culture in a way, but there is a tradition in Free Church Welsh Christianity that, the perfect Welsh, the most erudite way of expressing yourself, that a minister should be someone whose Welsh is complex. And people still have that at the back of their mind. Even first language Welsh people often think, well, I can't contribute because my Welsh isn't good enough, which makes those of us with a few words feel very inadequate. The other thing to say is it's not just our own resources. I mean, one thing I hadn't realised, Arun, my wife, is brilliant at finding resources, and a number of Christians have offered their music and their poetry and so on copyright free. So I noticed Cass Mayrig is one of our participants today. Cass is a very gifted songwriter and musician. She's made things available to us copyright free, where we don't have the skills to provide what she can. Resound Worship, a collective many of you know, again, they've made all of their things available. So, I mean, copyright's important because it pays people a living, but actually there are resources that even a local church without many musicians can make use of and can credit, and that exposes people to the gifts of others.
Okay. Now, another thing that all three of you touched on actually was this idea about community. And I know when lockdown happened first, a lot of people were very worried when churches closed about maintaining a sense of community. But a lot of churches will also say that they feel in some ways that the people feel more joined together than they've ever been. So for each of you, briefly, how have you made community the heart of what you've done as far as online church goes? What drives that? Perhaps Arun, if you could take that first, and then we'll come to Mark and David.
So I think there's been an intentionality for us around that. As I said, because as a gathered church where there are very few who actually live in the parish, there was a real fear that without people being able to meet as house groups, we have about an 80% take up of house groups. So it's quite high. Without that, and without being able to meet at church on Sundays, there was a real risk of that falling apart. What's been interesting in terms of community and people getting to know one another who perhaps, because they used to go to different services or committed to different time services, that through after service coffee on Zoom, where you have the random distribution, random into breakout room button, has become a real way of socially mixing in a way that hasn't been the case before. So we found this in the quizzes and in coffee, that people have said, I'm now actually, rather than going to talk to the same 3 or 4 people that I would over coffee at the end of the service and catching up with them, I'm now actually meeting people who have been coming to this church for 5 years but a different service to me. And now I realise we're part of the same church. So in some ways, it's deepened community as well, internally, in a way that physically we couldn't have them all in the same place otherwise.
Thank you. And Mark, has that been your experience in Aberystwyth? Because you've got quite a large online following now of people that you've picked up maybe since lockdown. So again, how do you work at maintaining that sense of community and belonging? Yeah,
it's a difficult point because you want to integrate the newcomers as you would do in a physical building, whereas people came and came part of you. I think it came to a head a couple of weeks ago when we interviewed one of our online church joiners who has nothing to do with us here in Aberystwyth. They're somebody who lived in South Wales, and we interviewed them as part of the service because we thought if they'd have been worshipping with us for 3 months in our building, we would have known them and they would have become members, and they were, just because it was online, how did we go through that of welcoming them into our community? So by featuring them in a service, we did that. We too found, like Arun, this random Zoom thing seems to work really well, that you get mixed up with people that maybe you wouldn't necessarily go and talk to in church, so that's mixed up. The other good thing with Zoom, of course, as well, if you've got larger communities, is that everybody has a name on the screen. So that can be useful as well, that you're actually learning people's names for the first time and putting names to faces. So that's been helpful as well.
Yeah, thank you. And David, your context is slightly different there, much more rural setting in lots of ways. So again, how's this idea of community in sort of a fairly rural environment like yours? How's that work for you?
I mean, absolutely echo what Arun and Mark have said about Zoom. I think the other thing to note is that online things can be more inclusive, not less. So many people struggle with hearing. They can set a volume on their computers. They can participate. We actually have two profoundly deaf people. One person who's hard of hearing, who participate very much in Zoom because it has the feature to have subtitles. And from day one, anything we've put out on film, we've edited to have subtitles, which doesn't seem to be as commonplace as it should be, really. And that again is an inclusive thing in community. And I also think people are talking now about blended learning. I know some Padarns has talked about blended learning universities, you know, online and physical. I think blended parish ministry is the way to build community. So some people who were very new to our life have been mainly engaged with us through the online period, have now met other people for socially distanced walks or garden parties in their garden, and particular friendships have developed out of that for people who might never have attended the same church building in normal times. And so those folk who are good at venturing friendship, it almost gives permission because you've had a conversation already online. I mean, obviously not everyone wants that, and you've got to be careful about privacy and boundaries, but I think, as I say, the body seems to be ministering to the body, and I'm so encouraged by that.
Question from Alan, just come up now, talking about sort of lay contributors, really. I think it was you, David, that said you've got lots of people contributing to those daily reflections. And he's saying before being broadcast, are people's contributions checked by clergy for suitability, or people given free hand? So is there a balance there between kind of wanting people to get involved, but also kind of not quite wanting to let go of the reins completely?
Yeah, that's a very perceptive question. You can't abdicate, that's for sure. I mean, my basic approach to life is pretty inclusive and pretty diverse, and I think I want to hear the different voices, but clearly there is a responsibility. So with the daily reflections, they're always edited, they're always curated. Now, some people get the form, just brilliantly express themselves, and you can almost upload what they've sent. Others, we have engaged in a conversation and changed what they've written. I mean, out of the hundreds that we've produced, only one person queried why a particular thing had been changed. I would say in general, it's not so much changing content, it's just getting people to think about who they're talking to. So early on, a lot of them said, you know, as I was saying to Mavis last week, or as us in this church talk about, well, of course, you could be talking to anyone, couldn't you? They don't even know where Conwy is, never mind your particular context. So just trying to broaden that sense that this is broadcasting, therefore not to make assumptions, which is salutary for all of us, isn't it? You know, actually in any communication as Christians, you know, don't assume everyone knows our sub jargon and our particular thing. So it's mostly been that kind of thing. I don't think I've changed anything theological. The one thing the person queried was that in the middle of a very good piece, they touched on a very controversial pastoral subject. And my attitude has always been that if you're going to talk about something that's very emotive, that has personal resonance, you don't just throw that in the middle of something. You prepare the ground as, you know, today we're talking about divorce or abortion or sexuality or something that has, you know, really tricky things for us to work through. And so it was a little bit thoughtless, that comment, which the person conceded then.
And really, as you touched on there, David, a lot of the issues, like the parameters around online church or doing things digitally, they're the same, really. The context, the landscape's different, but actually the background to it all is exactly the same. And as Arun was saying, it's you know, it's about community, it's about getting people involved, it's about reaching out to people on a daily basis, as you're doing, David. Mark, it's about in Aberystwyth looking for innovative ways, always, of kind of increasing the connection people feel to church. So I'm just conscious of time. I've got about 38 other questions I would love to put to you, but literally, just to finish off, try and cap it to a minute each, if you can do that. I know it's awful asking clergy to stick anything to a minute, but I'll try. So we've seen a real change in the pattern of the church last few months. We're really having to do it differently and be church in a different way. As churches begin to reopen, how do we hang on to that creativity that we've discovered as church online whilst beginning to regather as church? So Mark, if you can answer that in 60 seconds, you're doing really well, but let's have a go.
I think I touched on it a little bit in my thing. It's going to be mixed mode, and there'll be overlap between the two. As I talked about, things like we've had on our online church, clips from missionaries. We can incorporate that into physical church and show them on screens in church. We can record what's happening in church and show it online. So it's going to be two overlapping circles.
Okay. And Arun, is that kind of hybrid approach something that you're looking at St. Nick's going forward?
Exactly that language of hybrid church, and how we take the benefits of that. Again, with mission partners, over the past weeks, we've been able to pray with our mission partners in Latvia, in South America, in Kenya, in ways that otherwise we've been waiting for them to come back and furlough. We've been able to meet with them more over the past 3 months than otherwise we would have been able to do in over a year. And so being able to take those kind of opportunities and to embrace the fact that those barriers to church online are so low. Those barriers to encountering church have been removed. And through that, being able to put out that shop window just as a taste to enable people hopefully to come and see.
Yeah. And finally, David, it sounds like you've enabled a lot of people to kind of participate in church, perhaps who haven't before. And again, sort of, how do you ring fence that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think what strikes me is that the medium is not that relevant, really. It's about communication. And so, you know, in the same way St. Paul said he would find lots of different ways to connect with people. So, you know, I don't ask a deaf person, you know, why are you deaf? What's your medical condition? I say, how can I best communicate with you? What would help you in this communication? And I think, you know, IT, online things are just another way of communicating. I think the thing I've learned is not to be afraid of being on the edge of my competence and knowledge. I hadn't realised I was carrying around in my phone an incredible piece of technology that could produce really high quality films. And I hope the church doesn't settle back to just playing it safe to what we know how to do. We need to be on the edge of what we can do and what we know how to do, even if that makes it a bit messier and less professional and competent sometimes. You know, creativity happens on the edge, doesn't it? Not in the middle.
That's great. Thank you to all three of you for taking time out today and for sharing. It's been really, really good, fascinating seeing us all grapple with the same kind of issues, really, and approaching it slightly differently, but actually all looking for the opportunities that digital ministry, online ministry is giving us in our mission and ministry, not just with our existing church, but looking to build on that and bring people in, looking to make the most of the opportunities. So just a reminder to everybody that we have our second webinar for this week coming up on Friday. That's at 11 a.m. And Matthew Batten, who's head of communications in Llandaff, will be speaking to that. And we'll also be joined by Rana Khan, who's director of Crickhowell. And they're talking about how you create a dynamic and vibrant online presence that can reach beyond the traditional church walls, if you like. Just a heads up to next week. Monday, Chris Dearden is here looking at live streaming. Chris is from the BBC and brings an awful lot of experience to that. And then week Friday, we're looking specifically at youth and children's ministry. And my colleague Mark Griffiths will be leading that. We've got lots of people contributing to that as well. Just a reminder that the recording from today's webinar will hopefully be online for you on St. Padarn's website from Thursday. Bob and Peter's from are already up. And just to say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.